Hi, everybody. I'm Louie Lord Nelson, and I think they're going to get my presentation pulled up here in a second. All right. Is UDL part of the pendulum? This is the question that I decided I wanted to think about. We all know that there are pendulums everywhere, including, fashion. So if we look back here, this is the 1970s. Notice the bell-bottoms, the hanging out in front of the Brooklyn household. 2024, supposedly this is this coming fall, right? The pendulum has swung back, apparently, for the bell-bottoms. We'll see how long that actually goes. We have other fashion trends, right, that have come back. These are a few from my youth. I remember neon colors. They're popping up again. Hair scrunchies, anybody? And they call them cross-body bags. They're fanny packs. That's just what they are. But those have made their way back too. There are pendulums all over the place, including education. I contend that UDL provides us a mechanism to stop the pendulum from swinging, because we all know that pendulum has at times swung away from the kind of agency building, the kind of inclusion, what we are seeking with Universal Design for Learning. So my talk centers on us understanding the power that we can use with and alongside UDL to stop the pendulum from swinging and to maintain and create environments where all learners are building agency. So we know here within the newly announced guidelines that we have optimized relevance, value, and authenticity, and underneath that, nurture, joy, and play. I'm going to focus on play for a few minutes. So play has been talked about in the literature since the 1930s. This is a proposal piece that was written by John Hammond, who was then the athletics director at Boston College. And he wrote this, Play versus Work in the Gymnasium, because John wanted to see a gymnasium built with every grade school in the nation. Well, let's be clear, we were talking about white America at the time. However, this was his vision, but there was a lot of people who were against this. Why were they against this? Well, this was a time in the United States where we didn't even have child labor laws yet. Our children were working in factories. They were working under intense physical pressure. And then let alone that, the chores of our daily lives were much harder. So those children were getting plenty of physical exercise. So communities were like, why would we pay for a gymnasium to be added to a school? And John was making, or Dr. Hammond, was making the argument that play is an activity in which learning takes place, whereas work is just the repetition of habits. Play was an important part of his assertion and others within the journal. Let's go fast forward to here. A friend of mine named Tricia Friedman has a podcast called Shifting Schools. She just did an entire series on play, but she was focusing in on what we as adults, we as adult educators need to do in our lives, in our relationship with play. So you have access to these. You can see the link down there. You can listen to A.C. Holmes talk about play and its integral part of our lives. Play has been in the zeitgeist for almost 100 years. We've now got it in the UDL guidelines, which is exciting. How do we stop there? How do we make sure it stays? How do we make sure it stays in the zeitgeist and announced? The next thing, under develop a self-assessment and reflection, we have the proposed addition, which is now there, of practice empathy. So empathy has been in the literature since about the mid to late 50s, but it really took off in the late 60s, early 70s. David Aspey is one of those who wrote quite a bit about this. And in this study, which I'll tell you about really quickly, there were 6 teachers, 3rd grade, and then there were 20 students that were selected. Those students in September had taken the Stanford Achievement Test. Any of you familiar with the Stanford Binet? This is the one that precluded. They took that exam or assessment, and the 5 boys that scored the highest in IQ areas for reading were chosen for the study, and the boys who scored the lowest in IQ in reading area were chosen. Girls the same, 5 highest, 5 lowest. The teachers then taught their reading lessons throughout the year. Within the methodology, they were tape recorded, the technology of the day, and the researchers pulled 8 4-minute vocal segments from those sessions across all of the teachers, or I should say for each teacher. They used a tool that counselors, psychotherapists used on measuring empathy at that time. It was a validated tool, so obviously it was looking for vocal inflection. They then rated those teachers based on those findings. Some were high condition, some were low, and so it turned out that 3 of the teachers showed up as high condition, 3 of them showed up as low condition. They then said, okay, we're gonna go back, and those students are going to take that Stanford Achievement Test again. That was normal. I did it too, because that was in the time when I was in grade school. You took it in the fall, and then you took it at the end of the year. And they looked to see what your acceleration was. What they found was that learners, regardless of where they were on those IQ areas, if they were with high-conditioned teachers who showed high empathy, there was significant growth in their IQ scores. Significance meaning a statistical significance. Those who scored even at the highest with IQ, or those who scored the lowest, if they were with low-conditioned teachers who did not show empathetic growth and leadership, those children either stayed the same or their scores decreased. He was one of many who used a similar type of methodology over time to build this base, to say empathy is really important. So later that year, also 1975, I loved this title, but I did block part of it in case anybody is a little sensitive. But Empathy, Let's Get the HE double hockey sticks on with it. He was getting irritated by this time because he's like, look, we have so much evidence that empathy is needed in the classroom. We know this. We've got study after study. And in this particular piece, he talks about the systemic the ability to do training at a systemic level, helping teachers all over understand how important empathy is. How do we get this in? How do we get this just solidly a part of the teaching environment? That was his quest. Now, for those of you in the higher ed setting, I didn't want you to feel left out, and so this particular professor, Lunst from University of Chicago, there was also evidence at the higher ed level, and then he did his own ethnographic study within his own sociology courses. In this particular one, he had 20 students, sophomores and seniors, and what he did was he asked them if they wanted to take part in conversation groups. And in these conversation groups, these students had the opportunity to tell more about themselves, essentially, in our words today, be more vulnerable. And he was looking at and measuring whether or not these students felt that ranking was as important, or it was a lesser level of importance. And to him, that was an empathy marker within his research. And he was able to demonstrate that those students that either participated in these conversations or listened, they didn't even have to say a word. But if they were a part of that, then their ranking of, or their opinion of class ranking lowered. So for him, empathy also was part of listening, was taking on the stories of others. Well, we know this now for certain because of the wonderful Mary Helen Immordino Yang out in Stanford. So this is a little bit older book, but it's Mary Helen Immordino Yang's work along with Antonio Damasio, who had been her advisor but then became her research partner. They were able to demonstrate that when we experience empathy, that we neuronally experience that in our brainstem. Our brainstem is what allows our heart to beat all the time. Our brainstem is what allows us to breathe when we're not thinking about it. All those autonomic things. So the very thing that keeps us alive is where we neuronally experience empathy. I can't think of any stronger evidence than that to say we need to make sure that we are helping our learners and ourselves gain more empathy, understand what that feels like, and experience that. Now, here's where I'm going to feel like I'm doing a little bit of a heresy in the middle of this CASCON conference, because I'm saying that the answer isn't here. And you're like, wait, we just got some new guidelines. What do you mean, Louie? And here's why I'm telling you this. We need storytelling. We just heard this from Paula, right? We just heard this from Lindsay. And I was like, yay, we're on the same train. We've got to tell our stories. We've got to tell our stories more and more and more about how UDL is changing our lives and how it's changing the lives of our learners. 2 ways that you can either participate in or share those stories is there's 2 podcasts. The one on the left happens to be Think UDL. Lillian Nave is sitting right here. I didn't plan this. I swear I didn't plan this. But it's Think UDL. Focuses most of the time on higher ed, but then also adult world. So it's a longer form, but it is focused on UDL. It is focused on how UDL has helped folks bring all these parts of the guidelines into those arenas. UDL in 15 Minutes happens to be my podcast. It focuses on educators and their stories about UDL. 15 minutes, you can do the dishes. And you can listen to some awesome stories. But the point being here is that we need to build our empathy. And we build empathy by hearing the stories of others. Mary Hill and Imordino Yang's research, people were in fMRI machines and they were hearing stories. That's how they were able to make those connections and understand that, okay, that's what folks were reporting. They were saying, I report feeling empathy and then knowing and being able to do some correlation there. So we also have to talk about the hard stop, and this aligns with what Paula was just talking about. So this particular episode, 121, is with Heather Avery and Anthony Carey. They are in New Brunswick, Canada. New Brunswick, Canada has a policy on their books where there are no exclusionary settings. None. Every child is fully included in the general education environment. It's policy. So their use of the UDL framework is pretty darn intense. Well, Anthony is someone who had known about UDL and really enjoyed UDL and really loved building his lessons using it. But when he was presented this, he's also the technology teacher. What does that mean? Well, in New Brunswick, that means he's teaching kids how to sew with sewing machines. He's teaching them how to cook, hot burners, blenders. He's teaching them how to use small machinery, cutting tools. And in an environment and a structure that, let's just be honest, way around the world, people are like, oh no, we need to keep those kids safe, so we can't have them do these things. Anthony instead asks himself the powerful question of, am I leaving anyone out? And if we adopt that question, if we individually adopt that question, then we know that we are more in alignment with UDL. And then how we get started with those guidelines, if that's our premise question, and then we go into the guidelines, we are much more likely to include all learners. So these are the 2 things I'm asking you to do, is to share your stories. You can do it through Lillian or me, or CAST, as we're learning with the new website, and I would like you to embrace your agency and share it with others. Thank you very much.
While I'm getting everything set up, howdy y'all. I'm from Texas. Can you tell by my southern drawl? While I am getting everything set up on my other screen, I want to provide a description of myself for those that may have low vision in the room. My name is Corey Don Laws. I often go by Corey. I'm an African-American woman, about 5'4" in height. I'm wearing a afro, so this is my afro. I'm wearing a black long sleeve shirt, navy pants that have pastel flowers on them to represent spring and summer, and some brown sandals. All right, so I wanted to bring up some of the work that I am doing at Dallas College. Dallas College is actually one of the largest institutions that is in Texas. All right, so let's go. All right, as I mentioned before, my name is Corey Don Laws, but you can call me Corey. I am a faculty fellow and STEM professor at Dallas College, but my main role has been in the faculty fellow role, in which I generate professional development for our faculty, and then I deliver that professional development for faculty, and that's what really got me into UDL today. All right, so this is where the fun stuff happens. If you want to engage, using one or two words, how did you feel about UDL when you were introduced to it? So you are more than welcome to use the QR code. There also appears to be a website underneath, which I'm going to pull up here in a minute. But if you can, please respond, and then I'm going to hopefully have the website pulled up so we can see the responses there. So I will give everybody a little bit of time to do that. Let's see if I can get this page. So my apologies, I'm still having some issues with the website, because I want to make sure that you all can see the responses, and if not, I can pull them up later. But just in general, if you don't mind, we can go back to my presentation that I have originally on the screen, and I hopefully can pull this up later. Technology, am I right? All right, so I imagine, when I get the website pulled up, I imagine that what we probably have is maybe some words that look similar to these. So interested or interesting, engaged, maybe even scared, achievable, learning, optimistic. So one of the reasons why I had you guys do this is because this is the same thing that I had some of my faculty do. I actually started up a community of practice within Dallas College because we actually have no formal training for UDL at Dallas College. For Dallas College being a very large institution, it was pretty amazing to me that we didn't have anything like this. And if you're familiar with the higher education system, a lot of the time the faculty do not receive training, not any formal training or certificate when it comes to teaching. So this was really curious to me, considering that Dallas College is very large. So in the 2021 to 2022 year, we actually had over 100,000 learners that were enrolled. So that's across 7 different campuses in the Dallas Metroplex, and that also includes our online learners as well. Dallas College is a community college, so we are primarily teaching focused, and while we do have research that is available there, we are, as faculty, primarily focused on making sure that our students are getting the content that they need to move forward, whether it's receiving a credential in the form of a certificate or a degree. We want to make sure that we are focused on that. This slide deck is available on the website, so if you want to learn more about Dallas College, you are more than welcome to use that link to learn about us. Just so you can understand what the head count looks like so far and how diverse our student body is, we have 3,764 that are enrolled. This is as of yesterday. That are first time in college, continuing students, so students that have been enrolled in the past. They make up our second largest population of 14,000, over 14,000. Transfer in, these are people that intend to get a degree that transfer in from other colleges. Transient students, which are students that don't intend to get a degree, but they still want to get a class completed or maybe a few classes completed. And our largest population that we serve are our dual credit students. So why? Why did I do this? Well, our faculty were burnt out. They were burnt out, and we sent out a survey to our faculty asking them, why don't you participate in professional development? Well, look at the reason. The two biggest reasons is that professional development isn't offered at times that's good for them, and they're too busy or overwhelmed. This was something that was a continuous type of factor when it came to our faculty returning back after the pandemic. So I thought, what can we do, or what can I do specifically to help our faculty get back in the game? Because I know that they want to help our students get so that they're not as overwhelmed as well. What can I do to implement something that is going to both help them become practitioners of UDL without overwhelming them? So that's when I came up with using a community of practice to deliver this. So that's going to support our institutional goals, bringing all of our faculty together. It gives our faculty a starting framework so that they don't feel like they have to do everything at once, and it gives them an opportunity to collaborate with each other, especially since we are so large. We are across 7 different campuses in the Dallas Metroplex. So how did I implement this? So I included several different types of sessions. Some of them were live, of course, and then we had also asynchronous reflection, which gave people an opportunity to participate. Even if they couldn't participate within the live sessions, they could participate in other ways with sessions that were already recorded. When people came into the live recorded sessions, I actually had a series of 5 live sessions that the faculty could attend, and they didn't have to attend them all. They could attend whichever ones they knew that they could make it to. And what we would do is we would start off with something very similar, where we would have, how are you feeling about UDL? Do you feel like it's something that you can implement? And then we would proceed to talk about some of the things that they were doing in the classroom already, and perhaps some ways that they can include some other ways that were maybe more UDL focused. So this include going through the chat, talking to people. This included using maybe the whiteboard on Zoom or on Teams. And of course, they would just verbally talk to one another. In the asynchronous reflection, we would use the LMS that we use at Dallas College, which is Brightspace D2L. And this would, of course, implement things like optional discussion, journaling, and other ways that they could reflect on some of the information that was disseminated in the live sessions. So that went really well. This was over the course of spring of 2024, so it's just recently implemented. And the responses were overwhelmingly positive for the faculty. So they are very much on board with UDL. I actually found out that a lot of faculty are actually implementing UDL practices and don't even realize that that's something that they're doing. So it was really thought-provoking for themselves and for myself, because I realized that our faculty are actually doing a much better job than they think they are. They just need to have a little bit of collaboration surrounding them, just a big hug around them so that they know that they can keep going and they're doing the right thing. But there are some responses up there. I'll read 2 of them. I really appreciated the facilitator's energy and enthusiasm. I also appreciated that I will be able to access the cohort for several more months as I digest it. So that's really nice that they have an opportunity to do that. And I'll read this last one. It was rich with useful information. I also like the ability to feel free to discuss as we went along. The facilitator was very good at watching the chat as we went along, and it was very good at navigating the screens. I'm unlucky in that right now that I can't navigate the screens. So with that being said, what are my next steps? So I am intending to create a course now. So I actually have support from Dallas College. They're giving me a little bit of money to do this as well. So I'm hoping that with the help of some departments within Dallas College, I'll be able to implement a micro course, which will include things like badging, which will include things like credentialing, and hopefully that will help to get people excited and motivated about making sure that they understand how important UDL is. All right. If there are any questions, let me know. I'm going to see if I can pull up the screen now, maybe, while we're waiting. I still have 2 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions while I try to get the screen pulled up? No? Let's see. I had... in here, I just wanted to see what some of the responses were. Maybe. Sure, yeah. So while with the time that I have left, and oh no, it's not gonna even let me. Okay, well that doesn't matter. So one of the things that we actually went through there was a book that I actually used to conduct my sessions, Transform Your Teaching by Jennifer Pusateri. So she was out there not too long ago. And what I really loved about her book is that it's divided over 18 weeks. Our semester is actually broken up over 16 weeks, so it worked out very much. So sometimes what we would do is we would go through some of the activities that were presented in her book, such as how do you break down your activities in your classroom and how much of those activities are dedicated to passive and active learning, and how would you show that? How would you display that? So showing people how they could display that and maybe tweaking some things to make sure there were more active learning than passive learning going on within the classroom. So that was something that I used as a scaffold to help me implement the community of practice that I had. Yay, thank you.
All right. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Jameson. I'm joined here with Dr. Tanya Pinkerton. We're both from Arizona State University, #1 in innovation. Yay! I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, and I'm going to law school in the fall at ASU. And Dr. Pinkerton, she was my thesis advisor for my Barrett honors thesis. So I was researching proactive environments, specifically the principle of UDL's engagement within higher education as it pertains to students with ADHD. I'm not going to give you guys the whole ADHD spiel because, I mean, ADHD is ADHD. A lot of students with ADHD do have a lot of varying needs, though, and I was looking to find ways that we could address that a little bit. Students have a lot of challenges, especially as it pertains to things like credit completion, especially in a college environment. And I think that UDL could be a framework to assisting these students. So a little bit more background about me. I am a student with ADHD, and I had struggled a lot in the education system, even with so many supports and so many scaffolds within my own education experience. You know, I grew up within a family who was able to take me to the doctor, and I was able to go see a therapist and work on things, and I had a 504 plan and an IEP. But that doesn't help when other students don't have access to things like that. We need to find ways that we're able to support students. So with engagement, we want to ask how students engage with the academic content present within any discipline, and what choices can educators provide students so that they can better educate and engage, creating motivated and purposeful learners. So my goals within my study were to find ways that learners would benefit from the engagement principle, utilizing survey data collected through Qualtrics, and determine any gaps in educational need which could be addressed using the engagement principle. So we investigated, first off, in what ways and in what frequencies do students with ADHD, faculty, oh my goodness, I'm tossing my own words. What frequencies do students report that ASU faculty are utilizing, implementing strategies aligned to engagement? What strategies do students with ADHD find most beneficial? And what's the relationship between these responses pertaining to both occurrence and agreement as it corresponds to the student's disability status? So we utilized a survey through Qualtrics. The survey questions operationalized the UDL engagement principles, which I'll show you in just a moment. We had, for each guideline under engagement, we had one frequency of occurrence and one ranking of helpfulness. We had 79 total participants. They were all ASU students above the age of 18. We had 57 total completed surveys. We had a lot of people drop off of the survey midway through, and I worry that we might have experienced a couple of bots. We had 48 students who did not have ADHD and 9 students with ADHD to make up the population. So just going into the methods of engagement, which are outdated as of today, the guidelines within them that were operationalized within our survey were these 10. So 7.1 through 3, 8.1 through 4, and 9.1 through 3. So we utilized each of these little guidelines and we operationalized them into one survey question. So for example, if we had heightened salience of goals and objectives, which is 8.1, if you look at the way that we would write a survey question for it, we would model it off of this principle or guideline. So for 8.1, we would say, my professor blank offers learning objectives and materials in the classroom, and then agreement, do I find it helpful when my professor offers learning objectives on materials in the classroom? So we ranked it never to always. We coded it, I believe it was 0 through 4. I made an error on my slide, don't mind it. And then the agreement, we had strongly disagree to strongly agree, also coded 0 through 4. So I was going to do cards, but we're going to use hands. We can do 1 through 4, or 1 through 5. How frequent would you rate this guideline occurring in your learning experience or in your classroom, right? So just a show of hands, would you say that my professor never offers learning objectives on materials in the classroom, or would you say my professor always? 1 being never, 5 being always, and then we just have the in-betweens. We got some 4s, 3s, 4s, okay. We have a 5 over here, that's exciting. So my goal was to try and hear the student's voice on these things. And just to go through the second half of it, this was the helpfulness, so you would agree about how helpful this was. 1 being strongly disagree and 5 being strongly agree. Do you find it helpful when a professor offers learning objectives in the classroom? Show of hands, show of hands. 5s, okay, more 5s. I love to see 5s, that's exciting. Good, wonderful. So these are just some of our demographics. I'm just gonna kind of breeze through them pretty quickly. Most of our participants came from the Teachers College, as one might expect with the reach of Dr. Pinkerton and I. We also had a lot of students from the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, which is like the academic heart of the college, where we have a lot of our STEM and life science disciplines, but we also have a lot of humanities disciplines. After that, it was a lot of engineering, and then we had a small little mix of arts and business students. Most students had no disability, but we did have about 15% that did have ADHD, which mirrors a lot of population samples for how many students in a classroom might have ADHD, which I thought was really cool. And so we looked at the data and we graphed it all out. And we ranked the occurrence and we coded it 0 through 4. So you'll see at the bottom we have a 2.0, and then at the very top would be a 4, just to kind of make the graph a little bit smaller. And we had them rank the somewhat agree to strongly agree and all of the Likert scale things. And we found that students were ranking the occurrence of these UDL strategies between sometimes and often, which is pretty good. But for helpfulness, we saw that a lot of students were saying that they strongly agreed that these were really helpful principles. So within this graph, I have a lot of different colors and shapes, as one can see. There's blue, which corresponds to frequency, and red corresponding to helpfulness, and I separated them out by disability. So if you had ADHD or you didn't, by identification, triangles being ADHD, circles being no ADHD. So we found that for the most part, people are ranking that these scores or these tactics are really helpful in a classroom, especially in a college environment. But in some cases, we're not seeing that the frequency of occurrence is happening as much as we might like it to happen. So then we performed a t-test to answer that third research question about the difference or a disparity between disability status and what students do find helpful. And what we found was, across the board, there wasn't any statistical significance. Students are broadly agreeing that all of these strategies are really beneficial for their academic success. There's one of them on here that we actually got the exact same p-value between both, which I thought was really cool. But across the board, students were saying that despite their disability status, they still agreed that these tactics would be really helpful within a classroom to see. They also rated that choice in course material was rated at the lowest occurrence. So students are saying that maybe they don't see different ways to interact with different things in a classroom and show that they understand something using different methods of delivery, right? Like reading a textbook versus listening to a podcast. They also rated that learning objectives were the highest occurrence. Students see learning objectives so often within a college classroom, and I really enjoy seeing that because I think that they're a great framework for creating study materials, especially when you're looking at creating independent learners. On helpfulness, students had rated the helpfulness at somewhat to strongly agree. They said that improvement-oriented feedback was the most helpful. So when students submit things like essays or exams, they like seeing corrections or saying, this is something you could do better within your work. Because at the end of the day, a college student is primarily there to understand and improve upon the skills that they're studying. They were rating that community and groups were least helpful, but a lot of my thesis committee and I had kind of collectively agreed that the way that we had operationalized 8.3 was total trash and we could have done better. We had asked if students liked group work, but group work isn't every single dimension of that guideline. You can also find community and groups in other ways than just by doing group work. And as we all might know, college students really don't like working with partners. They like being by themselves a lot. So I think that in the future, redeveloping that entire question and the way that we measured that would have been much more beneficial for the study. We didn't find any statistical significance between either groups. UDL broadly benefits all students, as we've seen time and time again within study after study after study. And specifically for engagement, every student across the board was saying that these things were helpful. And I guess the fallback on this is that we really only studied engagement here. This was a college thesis. I had no state funding. I did not get any resources to do this. This was just what I had to do for Barrett. And I really would love to see in the future to be able to study, representation and action and expression. I think that operationalizing this would be a really beneficial thing for all college students, not just students who have ADHD or students with autism. A lot of students could benefit from studying these and seeing in a voiced manner, how can we benefit our students? So I guess for future research, we were looking at the investigation of these other two UDL principles. And just to add, since we got new ones today, I would love to measure with the new ones, including joy and play. I'm very interested in nurturing joy and play in a classroom, especially for college students. We also were looking at a focus study in each school or college, we can really vary up who we study. Teachers, college students have an obvious bias in that they probably are really familiar with UDL or they see it in their classrooms. And last, we could also study a different level of study. We had some doctoral students, we had some grad students, but for the most part, it was a lot of undergraduates, and I think that our study could really have been broadened by studying all students. So here is our information. I did do QR codes for the references, so if you're interested in seeing any of my sources or anything that I've looked at, that's going to be right there. I guess it got misformatted, but if you wanted to look at the full research, my thesis is linked right there. I believe it's a PDF. Our emails are also linked there as well. So if you have any questions in the brief moment, I can answer. If anyone has any, I would love to answer them. Yes?
Yeah, so it's interesting, you're studying on ADHD and the role that Julian plays in the lives of people with ADHD, because I also have ADHD.
Yeah.
And that interest piece that is really important, so I'm really interested in seeing your findings on that.
The interest piece was the most important part for me, because as a student with ADHD, if I'm not interested, I'm not buying. Right? That's just how it is for me. And so I think that when I was thinking about ways that students would want to interact, you know, it's like the thing that Paula had talked about earlier, the keyboard. If I want to interact with the keyboard, I'm going to want to be involved in the learning. So our research was really focused on this aspect, because if students don't have interest when they have ADHD, they're not going to touch it. So a lot of my information will be linked in that full thesis if you're interested in it. I can also provide you a link or email, etc. But it was really inspired by that. So, yeah. Thank you, guys.
So I'm going to take the bull by the horns because we actually, you know, it is now, 11:35. So we actually do have some time. So maybe the two other presenters, if you would be willing to come back up. And if people do have questions that you have that are lingering, because we do have about 10 minutes. Each of us gave a little bit of extra, we pulled a little bit of time from our presentation because we were nervous about having, you know, completing ourselves in time. So if you guys want to come up and anybody has any questions for the three of us, don't ask us to sing. I can. Right. So, anything that you want to know?
I have a question.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay, great. We have a microphone here if folks have questions from the audience. So I know there might be some lasting questions about the study, lasting questions about the higher ed.
I have a question. So my question was about the survey. When you conducted the survey and asked people to report if they had ADHD or not, did you require that they had something medical, or was it just totally self-reported and they just described if they had ADHD on their own?
Do you mind if I snag the mic from you? Yeah. Thank you. So when we reported, when we did the self-report, we had asked individuals broadly, identify with what you identify best as. So the question had answers of, I identify as having ADHD, I identify as having a disability outside of ADHD, I do not identify with having a disability, or I would prefer not to say. When we went to code it, the students with ADHD were one group because they just identified, I have ADHD. And then the group that said, I have a disability outside of ADHD, I prefer not to say, and then I do not have like any disability, they were grouped into the no ADHD group. So, yeah.
I have a question for you. All right, so we know that when we ask participants how they feel about something like UDL right off the bat, and people give their opinions, then we know sometimes they can go tumbling into that hole. I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. So what was part of your design to help either mitigate or pull those folks back in? What were your steps for that?
Really good question. So the recruiting process to get the faculty involved were people that were already interested. So I actually blasted out an interest form that asked people just plainly, how interested are you in UDL? And then I sprinkled a little thing in there. It's really going to help you with your students, right? So that's how I kind of drew them in. So I had, I think, about 50 or 60 faculty that were interested, but of course that number became a fraction of that because people just got busy and things like that. I mean, I still had faculty that were, I'm scared, I feel isolated, I don't know, I don't trust it, I'm not sure about it. But the way that I think I helped to lessen that like negativity that could happen in there is that I gave them a chance to just tell me at the beginning of our virtual sessions, just tell me why you're feeling that way, and let's get it out. Get it out. Go ahead and get it out, because I'm sure if you're feeling this way, maybe a few other people are feeling this way. On average, I had about 20 people in every live session, so it could be a little bit much, but for the most part, when they felt heard, I think that went down. So the same thing that I try to do with my students, you have to do with the faculty, because they're just like them.
Exactly. So I have another question for you. So although you were talking about low response rate, you really had a really high response rate, actually, when we think about it, what often happens with surveys. Yes. So I was wondering if you had any structures that you put in place to encourage students to, because it sounds like there was continuous participation, right? So it wasn't just a one-time. Right. That's what, okay. And so how did you encourage that consistent participation over time?
So our survey was one short 20-minute, 20-question survey. I think when we applied for the IRB, we had said it was about 15 to 20 minutes maximum. When I went to complete the survey myself, like just to test it out, I took it in 10, right? A few of my friends had all taken it in 10. So we had like that, balance on it. But one thing we were really worried about was completion rate, especially if we're thinking about students with ADHD. If I have to sit down for 20 minutes and complete something and really think about myself as a person and my learning style, my brain starts to really overthink, and then I want to put it away. Or I get distracted by something and then I put it away. So what we did was we really wanted to do something that was short, that was simple, it was digestible. So our questions, they mirrored each other, right? So we had, I like it when my professor offers different variation in the classroom. I find it helpful when, and then we just ask them like, what do you think about that? And I would agree with you, actually. It is a really high completion rate especially for an undergraduate honors thesis. We had a lot of success with it. But one of the ways that we really encouraged participation, we poked around all of our little buildings at ASU, and we were like, hey, you're my student, you should take this survey, or hey, you would be interested in this study, please take my survey. And then we also had a few raffles and gift cards that were offered, and we gave out some coffee gift cards for the completion of their time. But we really wanted to find a way to motivate students and simplify the process, not just because the students would have a hard time with completing something, or we doubted people, but if we're going into researching this further with something like action and expression and representation, we want a uniform dialogue, right? We want something that's going to be easy to operationalize no matter what circumstance. If we created something complex, people wouldn't be able to retest it or review it.
So what I love about this, and you didn't say it explicitly, but you were using UDL-aligned thinking in the design of the study, and so that would almost be an interesting go back, and I don't know if you had to write that up or not, but that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, where were you UDL-aligned, and whether or not you actually had the guidelines out in front of you to help prompt some of that thinking, or was it just kind of an automatic because you're immersed in this? What would you say?
I would say Tanya and I both thought about it very long and hard, but I think that the way that we designed it was very introspective. Tanya and I were sitting down, we were meeting about this, and I was like, as a student with ADHD, I need to think the way that another student with ADHD is going to think, right? If I'm targeting a specific audience, I know I need to target that specific audience, and I need to sit myself in the shoes of it. And so whether or not I did it explicitly and said, I'm going to use every single checkpoint in UDL, right? I had it in front of me, so I'm sure there was some sublime influence occurring, but I think that a lot of it was just being introspective and thinking about if I was this person taking the survey with no understanding or knowledge of what the future plan is, how would I respond? So.
Yeah. That would be the definition of empathy, right? That's the definition of empathy. This is so well designed. You would think that CAST maybe thought about this, putting us all three up here. That's fabulous. Okay, so do we have any other, I just want to make sure if there's anybody that was spontaneously thinking. I can keep going. I lead a podcast. I can ask questions forever. Okay. I know this is this is like my thing. Okay, so I'm going back over here. So when you were moving through, and if you don't have Jennifer Pusateri's book, I mean, she's going to be out there signing as a CAST author. You can go talk to her more about it. It is an incredible book. It's great. But the question is, was there anything that you tried that in retrospect you were like, we're going to do that differently? Not because of her book, but if there were any activities that you got into and went, I want to revise that the next time. Or you could answer the flip of it. We got into that and you got into it and you were like, that was so good. We are so going to do this again.
Ooh, good question. Okay, so I do have one. When we were talking about the +1 approach, right? That's a very common approach that I think a lot of people take and they don't realize that they're actually doing that. But I gave them the template to use that's in her book, right? So I let them use the template. The thing that tripped them up was the again, it's outdated now, but the 9 guidelines, right? They were like, I've never read this book before, so I don't know what any of this means. So I think it wasn't a bad approach because they still understood the actual point of the +1 approach. What's something that you're going to do differently that you didn't do in the past? Just tweaking one itty bitty thing. So they understood that, but they didn't know how to line it up with those 9 guidelines. And I think what I would do differently, because I really did like that activity, is just give them a better introduction into it beforehand. Just give them a few materials that helps explain what those 9 guidelines mean so that they're not so tripped up about it. Because I was like, it's important to understand what it means, definitely, because you want to align them as close as possible with them. But the point of the whole thing is to make sure that what you're doing now is going to result in something better than what you did then. That's the entire point, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we can be like the favorite instructors ever and say, we're going to stop 2 minutes early and we'll break and I think we go to lunch next or what. I'm seeing other treats back there. But anyway, thank you everyone so much and we hope you enjoyed everything and please take advantage of their resources. All right, thanks. Bye.